The button flower is made out of two pieces of steel. A 1/4 by 2.5 by 2.5 plate, which I create into an octagonal shape by driving down on the corners. And then this is held down with a mushroom cap hold down. So this is a bit of a process. What I have to do is evenly work all four corners to create the octagonal structure. Now to do this, the easiest way is to heat one of the corners more than the opposite corner, and that way you get less deformation on the bottom of the bar. Now that's a little tricky in a gas forge, which I'm using just out of the view here, but I'll try and even up all the pieces, all the points. I do this by working opposite sides, opposite corners, and work that down until I get my octagonal shape. So here I'm continuing the process again, working the last four corners, opposites. And again, this is just creating the silhouette shape of the octagonal. If you had cut it out of a piece of plate, you could just cut in the octagonal. There is an advantage to working the corners this way. What happens is you're actually upsetting those corners and creating the thicker bar, and then when you work with the cross peen of the hammer to create the texture, that will give a more defined scallop, a more defined curve that becomes visually apparent. If you just cut it out of the plate, you'll still get some nice texture, you'll still get a nice look to it, but you won't have the dramatic sculpting going on. So here at this point I'm showing you the cut tool, the hot cut, that I'm using to split the steel on the flower. It's essentially a very dull chisel. I use it under the air hammer, so it's quite short, welded onto a handle. It has more of an axe grind on the edge as opposed to a knife grind. The hold down is a really cool invention. It's basically a mushroom cap welded to a steel bar that fits through the pritchel hole on my anvil. In the bottom of the bar is a hole that a foot pedal links into. So I can increase the pressure just by standing more heavily onto the foot pedal. I want to release it, I can just take my foot off. And you'll see I'll use this multiple times. It's a very handy tool, easy to make. The key is the dome in the mushroom cap, because that grabs onto the steel. So there's the first cut, and I go deeper at the edge and work towards the center. And you can see the center dot, the center punch, where I'll eventually drill a 1/4 inch round hole. Another heat, same process, identical. I start from the outer edge, get my alignment, and then slowly work into that center portion. And then I just go over top of it to clean up all the ragged bits. You want a nice smooth transition from the center out to. So we continue on. I'll end up doing 8 of these all the way around, and they're at the points of the octagonal. You can see 2 nice cuts there. And the points allow the flat section. They create a pie shape when you're all done, and that flat section is what you use with the cross beam to create the scallops, the curves and the ridges in it. I like the welded handle. It allows me to see the work, get my hands away from the heat as well. It's a good combination, works well for me. And there's the 8. So now I'm using an anvil block, and this allows me to hold the tongs close to the bottom surface, and just fits into the anvil hole, nothing major there. The hammer I'm using has a fairly blunt crosspeen, and I'm working it on a diagonal. So I'm thinning the edge out much more than the center. Takes a little bit of practice with the targeting. You want to get center first and then slowly work out to the edges. A little closer view here. And you keep working it. Again, I like to work opposite sides. You can see some of the texture there. The opposite sides is really so I just keep everything balanced as I work along. Unfortunately, my camera focuses just on the hot steel. You can see what's going on, but you really can't see the surrounding anvil or the surrounding environment in the shop. And I had a series of floodlights and spotlights positioned on this as well. But you see what's going on. That's the main thing. So just finishing up the texturing. And you can see some of the texture on the flower itself. Wire brushing, get rid of the loose scale. Now at this point it's just center punched, and I will be drilling a hole in it, which I've done before this clip. And it's a 1/4 inch hole. This is a 1/4 inch square bar that I'm driving through the hole as a drift. Now this was just a piece of cold rolled steel, but you could certainly use tool steel if you were going to do a lot of these. Keep it from bending. Driving it through over the hardy hole. And we're through. Square hole. And that is so that the button doesn't rotate. So that's the flower structure finished. Now we start on the button, and this is where the 7/8 round bar comes in. You could use 3/4 inch, you could even use 1/2 inch. This is the shouldering tool that I use. It's sort of a guillotine shouldering tool, top and bottom, single pivot point. Fits into the hardy hole of the anvil, and I'm only really using about 1 inch of the material. And first I'm creating a square shoulder on it, so I'll work from the top, switch 90 degrees, work that. And I'm trying to work it down so that the dent, or the groove, is leaving about 1/2 inch to 3/8 inch of material. Take a couple cycles with this. You can see starting to get the dent in it. Now the shouldering tool is made out of mild steel. You can see the deformation on the top bar. I haven't had a problem with that over the years. I just remove the top bar once it wears out and put in a new one. The bottom one has not worn out at all. You could make it out of tool steel, certainly. It's getting down now. So, now I'm stretching it out. And with this, hard to see in the video, but I'm actually using the near corner of the anvil, but the near corner of the hammer to stretch it out. So it's almost like drawing out on the horn, but I'm using the edge of the hammer. Drawing out, long drawn out process. Now the shank that this will make would be about 4 or 5 inches long, and I need nothing that length for this. So I'll end up cutting it off to about 1 inch in length and continuing the taper after that. So hot cut. And this one I'll cut from all 4 sides so that the ragged bit's right in the middle. Break off the piece, and believe it or not, there is a scrap bucket there, and now I stretch out the shank a little bit further. What I'm trying to do is get the shank to fit into that backing plate that you saw earlier in the video, and you'll see I'll be testing that shortly. Square shank, square rivet, square hole, nothing rotates. That's coming. That's the backing plate. And it does have a square hole under the white circle. And that's what I'll be fitting to and then eventually driving into to upset the button. Check the fit. Getting close. Couple more heats, refine that shank. You want a nice fit so that it comes up close to the shoulder that you've made. If you're too far above the shoulder, when you go to hammer it down, you end up warping your shank or bending it all out of position. This way, if it's close, I have no issues with it. So again, just cleaning that shoulder, getting it to slide in a reasonable distance. There, that's what I'm looking for. So that's about a ½ inch spacing between where the taper of the shoulder starts and the backing plate. So at this point, I've cut the end of the bar off. I left a slug from the original parent bar, and that creates the button that I start to upset. So this way half of my work's done, as opposed to taking a ½ inch bar and upsetting it to 7/8. Much faster, much easier for me. Now I'll use a rounding hammer, and what I'm trying to do is actually drive that whole steel hot rivet head into that round circle on the backing plate. For years I struggled with this, getting things centered, getting the stem centered on a rivet. And then I hit on the idea, you just draw a bullseye, essentially a target, and you fill the target with the steel, and you're guaranteed to be centered. Such a simple thing, and it works really, really slick. Now I've actually used an engraver and put an engraving of the circle into the steel, and then I use a white charcoal pencil to mark the line around, and that way I can see it really easily and it doesn't rub off after a few hits. But you can see I'm slowly working that steel into the white line surrounding it. Simple technique, works really, really well. The rounding hammer gives a nice texture. You can really see some interesting work with it. I use it a lot when I'm working with the flowers. So this is creating the dimples in the center of the button. And I'm just randomly using a center punch around and around and around. I can do it when it cools down. As you can see, we're almost at a black heat now. What I'm doing as I slow down is I'm looking for spaces that I didn't get the center punch in the initial random all over the place. So I'm trying to fill in. You could use cross hatching, you could use square stamps, you could use anything. And it's just to create a visual contrast, a visual texture for that center button of the flower. And here you can see individual gaps between the center punches. Just trying to fill those in. I chose a round button. You could easily do a square button. Again, a lot of this is open to interpretation. And you can see the button. And let's see if it fits into the flower now. Yes, it does. That's the finished button flower.